A human rights decision says a woman cannot be refused a job just because she's pregnant. Last night, employer Jim Mercier said he would fight the ruling no matter what the cost. Tonight, Gayle Gavin, the lawyer who won the decision for her pregnant client. But first, the underworld of drugs and murder, not the kind of place you'd want your family exposed to. It caused one former RCMP officer to flee with his family after they were threatened with murder, and now he's fighting for his rights. Kim Westberg, a 14-year veteran of the force, is up first with Webster. A human rights decision says a woman cannot be refused a job just because she's pregnant. Last night, employer Jim Mercier said he would...
Good evening. Tonight I'm going to take you into the world of the RCMP, of drugs and murder and death threat, and how a family was shattered. But first, here's Steve with the rundown.
A human rights decision says a woman cannot be refused a job just because she's pregnant. Last night, employer Jim Mercier said he would fight the ruling no matter what the cost. Tonight, Gayle Gavin, the lawyer who won the decision for her pregnant client. But first, the underworld of drugs and murder, not the kind of place you'd want your family exposed to. It caused one former RCMP officer to flee with his family after they were threatened with murder, and now he's fighting for his rights. Kim Westberg, a 14-year veteran of the force, is up first with Webster.
On the face of it, it would seem that the guest in the studio now has been messed around by the RCMP and the political bureaucracy. You can decide how strong a case he has for better treatment in fairness and in justice. The man is Kim Westberg. He's 33. 14 years he was in the RCMP, and he has a wife, Laverne, and 2 children. And in December he'd been working with CLUE since the end of '81. CLUE, the Coordinated Law Enforcement Unit, you know, the heavy boys. And in December 1984, he was down in Portland doing something very special. What was it?
At that time, I was involved in a Van Dorn murder trial, and I'd relocated a key witness in the conspiracy to commit murder to Portland from another location in the United States.
You'd gone down there, found this woman witness, Judy Russo.
That's right.
You brought her up to Portland, you re-established her, and you debriefed her, and you're kind of making sure she's going to be around to be a witness in the Campog murder trial.
Campog, Paulo, and Schnaub murder trial, which was forthcoming in January. While I was down there, my boss, my immediate non-commissioned officer in charge of my branch, phoned me in Portland at the hotel and asked me at that time, he says, I've got to advise you or ask you if you know where your family is. And I said, how do I know? I said, I haven't been home for, a week. And he said, well, you better think where they are. And
your family were in Victoria at the time?
They were in Victoria. I lived in Victoria.
You're in Portland, you get a phone call from your immediate boss saying, hey, Kim, do you know where your wife and children are? And did you?
No, I didn't. I had to rake my mind to establish really what day of the week it was and where they might be. I was quite involved naturally in what I was doing, and I recalled that they were at the Sydney Ice Carnival, and he said that there's a situation that had arisen and that there was a threat against myself and my family, and he deemed it necessary to take some further steps and to put them into protective custody.
So you remember that you phoned this recreation center and you got hold of your wife on the phone through the PA system?
That's right. I paged her through the public address system, got her to the telephone, and I didn't tell her an awful lot. I just said, stay there, something's come up, Larry from the office will be there, and just stay there and don't go anywhere.
So later that evening they swooped, took your wife and your children and put them into what amounted to protective custody?
That's right. It wasn't later, it was very short time thereafter. They came down, grabbed onto her and the children, whisked her off, went to our residence for a short period of time and grabbed a few clothes and took and hid her in one of the hotels.
In other words, your superiors regarded this as a very serious threat against you, your wife, and your children. It hadn't come from the actual case you were working on, though, had it?
That's correct.
It had come from an earlier case.
It came as a result of a case that we'd been working on for probably 3 years at the time, and it culminated in the arrest of a group of individuals right from Bolivia, South America, on through to the street traffickers in Vancouver Island.
When you had the people potentially involved in the arrest, and I won't ask how the RCMP knew about the threat, you were properly and reasonably concerned, if not panic-stricken, about your family.
That's right, and my wife, I think it really impacted her when the RCMP and the officers came and swept her up and threw her, well, not threw her, but put her in a police car and took her away, and really were not willing to give her an awful lot of information about what was going on, but yet telling her that don't worry, things are being looked after. But yet, in the 14 years that I'd been a police officer, never had she been subjected to being taken into a car and the security around her.
Because as a police officer, you're not unaccustomed to threats. If you arrest somebody or face up to someone, they'll always threaten to kill you. But this was, they'll sometimes threaten to kill you, but this was a different caliber of threat. What kind of weapons were going to be used in any attempt to waste the Westberg family?
Like you said, Jack, this wasn't, most police officers, if they're doing their job, end up with some kind of personal confrontations of some kind during their police duties of being, threatened that during an arrest that somebody will, they're going to get your family, I know where you live or whatever. This threat was a little bit different in that it came as a result of intelligence through a coded informant. And so there was the problem there of either disclosing the informant.
Here is the Westberg family, and your wife must have been very upset at that time, and perhaps even more upset later on. You are in proper protective custody by your colleagues, and you have no complaints about the steps they took to protect you.
No.
When did the force believe that threat was over and finished?
I was never given any information by the force as far as what they believed or didn't believe. All I know is the steps and the action that they took. They deployed a Special O surveillance team with 16 men and airplanes to do surveillance for a period of, I believe, around 7 days. And
What kind of effect did that have on you and your wife and your family, then and there and later on?
It really made us sit down and consider the role that I had as a police officer, and the work that I was doing. I think before that time, as a family, it maybe didn't
click.
That's right. And now all of a sudden it was always something that would maybe happen to somebody else, and now it was happening to us.
Now, you didn't quit the force at that time or anything, but what would the force normally suggest be done in a case like that? You owned your own house in Victoria?
Yes, we did.
So what happened after that, in short form?
Well, after being in the force for that period of time and knowing of these situations that happened before, I realized, of course, that there was a transfer that could be implemented or put in place. The force, though, didn't give us any direction one way or another, whether at that point in time, whether they were going to transfer us or not. And we stayed in the hotel. Our children are concerned about Christmas, of course. We couldn't have any visitors. Santa Claus, on December 20th when this happened, naturally our Christmas tree was all set up with the gifts under it.
Everything shattered.
All of a sudden, there we were in a hotel room, and the children were upset with the fact that Santa Claus probably wouldn't be finding them and all these things. But we stayed in that hotel then until around the 6th of January, at which time those other duties that I had required me to take and travel again out of the country. And my wife wouldn't stay by herself, so I took her with me and put her in a hotel at Portland, Oregon, when I was involved in this other investigation.
Did the force appreciate that, or did they think you were doing the wrong thing? Did you get permission to do that or not?
No, I didn't. Chief or Assistant Commissioner Wilson, when he directed me to go to Portland to carry out my duties down there, I had suggested that, or he had suggested he'd be flying me down there with the police plane to do those duties, and I said, no, that's fine, I'll take my wife and family, or I'll take my car and I'll drive down there to do those duties. And he wasn't aware of the threat that it hadn't happened at this time, so he didn't sanction me taking my family. But I was caught then in making a decision of not doing my duties or else taking my family.
And then when did you come back to Victoria?
We didn't come back to Victoria until such time that the person involved in these threats was put in jail. And at that time, which was the 24th of January, we did come back to Victoria.
So therefore you felt that was kind of reasonably over, but you were then in a terrible mess. Did you ask for a transfer, or did the force come to you? And what did you want the force to do for you at that time? But perhaps you better tell me that after this break. It's kind of difficult for ordinary people not involved in the tense kind of caper you were in to appreciate the amount of stress and trauma that must have put on your family. But when you finally came back from Portland, did you move back into, what kind of threats were being made to the house?
The threat was that I'd been under surveillance personally by this group, and that they were going to take out Westberg, and they were going to throw hand grenades through our house and take out my family, and if they weren't able to do that, they were going to take and throw hand grenades through the office that I worked in, and that naturally put some of the people that were working in the office
in somewhat of a state of concern. As a matter of fact, they had to beef up the security down at that place, didn't they now?
Previous to this, an individual that was involved in this investigation was found taking down license numbers of vehicles down there, and was confronted by a security officer who asked of him what he was doing, and he said, looking around, and as a result of that, they spent $25,000 beefing up the security there.
Did you ever get your wife to move back into that house which you had bought in Victoria?
The time that we were away, we weren't reimbursed for any of the expenses, and I was using my charge card, charging all these expenses while we were gone, and we had been led to believe by the RCMP that there would be some kind of technical assistance given us in regards to our home, and there was supposed to be security, alarm system put on the house, plus video, and we were at a loss really, and the force hadn't given us any direction at this point in time what they were going to do.
In other words, you were down in Portland and coming back, down in Portland with your wife and kids, carrying out your duties, and meanwhile the RCMP were going to beef up the security in your house with alarm systems and whatnot.
That's right.
They never did.
No, they didn't.
So then you wanted direction. What was the direction you wanted from the force after this somewhat fearsome experience?
Because of the nature of the threat, myself and my wife felt that we couldn't go back to that house. It was tainted, and like my wife said, she felt that the house was similar to an old coat, that she just wanted to shred it and just be gone and just out of that situation. So the only tool that was available, well, as a result of that, we were interviewed by the staffing and personnel officer, Inspector Goodwin, on the 31st of January, just a few days after we got back. And we expressed to him our concern that we can't live in this house, and we wanted the RCMP to take the house and take it up the responsibility of our house and give us the equity in it, so we could just go and start a new life in a new house and get going.
On a transfer?
That's right, whether it be a transfer or another house in Victoria.
So therefore you were looking for compensation for any money you would lose in your house. Forgive me for putting it in crass terms. You were looking for a transfer and compensation for your out-of-pocket expenses when you had to take your wife down to Portland to be there while you were working on the Campo case. After
the interview and our concerns were expressed to the staffing officer, he recommended that we be transferred. That was the only alternative that he felt, that was the only tool he had available to himself to take and help us as a family. And as far as the money that we'd spent, it was not just while we were in Portland. After I'd finished the work in Portland, I then, because of the fact that this fellow was still at large in Canada, stayed down there, and we kept our children out of school, and we stayed down in the States until the 24th of January, at which time we came back. He, at this time, was put in jail. And then you went back into the house temporarily, but you put it up for sale. Yes. You still had no decision from the RCMP if they would pick up. No. Even though they've got wonderful witness protection programs for that kind of thing, they don't have it for police officers, obviously. The only policy that they have, Jack, is the policy that covers an ordinary transfer. This situation was clearly not an ordinary transfer. We didn't have the tools available to us to market the home. How much did you lose on the sale of the house? We felt $26,000 we lost on it. We decided that we couldn't stay there any longer. I mean, my wife, I managed to secure a leave from the force. They said, fine, stay with your wife as long as you need until this situation arose, or until it was over with. And that was very gracious of them. I did that. We put the house on the market and fire sold it, and in the hopes that they would be benevolent enough afterwards to reimburse us for the loss. No, they never did. No, they haven't done up to now. And then you were transferred to Kelowna. That's correct. Now, in Kelowna, you were up there from March of that year till about November that year, and you were trying to get some direction from the force. You had a number of requests, one of which was for a leave of absence, with pay or without pay? With pay.
This is to get over this experience you had.
Exactly. Our family was, you know, after the threat had finished with, and that was done, the RCMP believed that their responsibility was finished once they believed that the threat was no longer would carry itself out.
But you didn't believe that the RCMP responsibility was finished at that time?
Well, really what it did was took us from one step and opened up another door, which was all the other problems that faced us then with our family situation. And the one was the loss of the equity in our house. Mm-hmm. The second thing that I'd wanted was to be able to have a leave of absence from the RCMP with pay, so I could take, and as a family, we could take and remove ourselves from this for a while and just see if, as a family, we wanted to continue being involved in police work of this nature. If you could recover.
That's right. Now, you wrote many letters to many people. Did you? You never got any instant answers from almost anyone, did you?
No, we didn't.
Although I see that one of the acting commissioner's letters way back in November '85 said that with respect to the leave of absence you had sought, because of the quality of your service, because you have an exemplary record and personal heroism and all the rest of it, and praised for your material which sends crooks to jail, this acting commissioner of E Division said, because of the quality of your service, he had suggested to Ottawa that if he does have to leave the force to stop the division created in his family, that perhaps the commissioner would be prepared to waive the procedural preference rules should you be otherwise suitable when you apply to rejoin the force. Were you willing to leave the force on a leave of absence at that time and then come back again?
Yes, I was. That's what I was requesting, and I felt positively, you know, reassured after reading that portion of that memo that there was going to be forthcoming some kind of a procedure where I'd be able to take and leave the force for a period of time.
So what you were looking for was a leave of absence, the recovery of your $26,000 lost in equity in your house, resubmitting some of your expense claims when you were away 10th to 28th of January '85, yes, which you got.
A year after the situation, I was reimbursed finally by the RCMP for my expenses for the hotels and the meals for my family from the 20th of December till the 24th of January when we were in hiding.
Meanwhile, your wife was writing to Solicitor General, and you were writing to Solicitor General too. But you never really did get anything from Perrin Beatty at all, did you?
No. At that time, we wrote a letter to Elmer McKay, who was the Solicitor General, and we did receive a reply shortly thereafter from Perrin Beatty saying that he would ask the RCMP to look into this issue. That was in August of 1985.
Matter of fact, I have a letter here of February the 10th, 1986 from T.S. Venner, the Deputy Commissioner, who points out that you had been ordered to return to duty at Kelowna on 2 separate occasions, and you failed to do so, and you therefore were a deserter and should be discharged in accordance with so-and-so, so-and-so. Were
right.
you ever discharged as a deserter?
No, I wasn't.
Why not?
As a result of this campaign to try to establish some direction in what we were going to do or what we planned on doing, we had asked the RCMP for some direction in what we should be doing, whether have some of these answers to our questions. Plus, we felt forthcoming would be an answer from the Solicitor General in regards to the question of the leave of absence, the lost equity in our home, and our expenses. In November of 1985, after receiving a copy of the Assistant Commissioner's memo saying that he was supporting our request for a leave of absence, I felt forthcoming was going to be some kind of a direction or answer from the Solicitor General in regards to this.
No, he said, I'm not prepared to support the position regarding his request that the force pay $26,000 or his request for the leave of absence. He supported you on the point that if you left the force temporarily, you should be allowed to get back in again when you felt up to it with your wife and family.
That's right.
That's what he supported.
Yes.
But did the discharge fortunately didn't take place because...
What happened was my wife and family in November went down to see relatives and to stay with relatives in the United States, and I went with them. I had leave credits built up so that I wasn't to be back on duty until January 5th, 1986. I didn't have any answer, any direction late December 1986, so I wrote a letter at that time to the commanding officer of BC saying that I was aware that my leave credits had expired on January 5th or would expire.
What about answering the requests?
I asked him to give me some direction, and I told him that I would resign from the RCMP at that point in time if they felt they could not give me a leave of absence.
Instead of which you were told that you would face a board to be put out the force as a deserter. But meanwhile, you were sent to telex.
Well, what happened was when I asked them for direction then in regards to my leave expiring and whether or not I should resign, they chose not to address that letter and instead procrastinated on their decision until February. And at that time, I was served with notice that I was being charged as a deserter.
And you sent a telex saying, hey, don't do that, let me resign.
No, I sent a letter to the Solicitor General in February outlining all these circumstances to the Solicitor General, asking him to table the board that was going to be convening on my discharge until he had answered my letter on the leave of absence.
Well, Perrin Beattie never did answer your letter. He said,
No, he
I've been
didn't.
informed of the full circumstances of the situation, satisfied the Commissioner has handled the matter fairly. Your discharge as a deserter was being processed. However, in response to your telex request, the Commissioner has accepted your resignation. End of story.
Right. What
You
happened?
feel you've been treated unfairly?
Yes, I do.
How unfairly?
I feel that they ended up, by virtue of their not answering any of our questions or giving us any direction for a year in regards to what we shouldn't be doing, I wrote in a memorandum to them that I would resign from the RCMP if they decided not to give me a leave of absence. And they chose to not give me any direction.
You're telling me that for well over a year they waffled and finally took steps to discharge you without answering what you regarded as your fair requests in the special circumstances of paying back your $26,000 lost on your house and making life easier for a family which had gone through this to stop the division created in your family.
Right. And now I was faced with the same question I did a year ago of whether I put my family or the RCMP first.
And what have you decided to do?
To put my family first.
And do you still feel you've been unfairly treated?
Yes, I do.
And an officer in your tricky position with a good record. By the way, you would get your 14-year pension.
I was never even offered a pension of any kind.
Are you entitled to one after 14 years?
My understanding is it is an option that can be entertained by the Commissioner after a member has 10 years service, but again, I was never offered any pension.
And you've received your pension contributions back plus small interest?
I've received my contributions plus, I think, 1 or 2% interest for the last 14 years.
It's a tough one, you see. We've got all kinds of witness protection programs for criminals, but we don't have any policeman protection program. It wouldn't be unusual for them to spend $100,000 to relocate a useful Crown witness, would it?
No, it wouldn't. As a matter of fact, I was involved in cases where that did happen.
Well, I feel a certain amount of sympathy for you. Take calls on this one, tricky one, after the break. Now, if I'm normally transferred in the RCMP and I lose $26,000 in my house, the force doesn't make up that money for me, does it?
That's correct. Under a normal transfer, a member is expected to market his house in whatever manner he feels appropriate, and that is obviously doing what's necessary through the real estate industry.
And you think that in your case, where you're forced to sell it because of the fear to your family, they should make up a difference?
Well, we couldn't go back and rent the house and administrate the...
As a matter of fact, it'd be very tricky selling that house to someone and not telling them it was liable to be bombed.
We asked the staffing officer if we should disclose that, and he said, no, don't bother, it's not a structural fault.
He's technically correct. It wasn't a leak in the roof. It might just have been a grenade through the front window.
That's right.
However, nothing happened to the house, let me hasten to add. Go ahead, please.
First of all, I'd like to commend Mr. Westberg. I think he's a hero just being there. I'm familiar with how the internal investigations within the RCMP function, and you're fighting a bureaucracy that I don't think you'll ever win. They'll discredit you in one way or another, regardless of how right you are.
Thank you, ma'am. Go ahead from Trail, BC.
Yes, good afternoon, Jack. This gentleman, having spent 14 years in the force myself and ran a number of undercover operations in the Prairie region, he's fighting a losing battle here because of the distance that the senior personnel in the organization are from this situation. Most of your senior personnel have no idea of what these people have to put up with and the dedication that they put into their job. And I just feel very sorry for this young man.
Well, did you get a pension after 14 years or just your contributions returned?
No, I chose to get out, so I just took my contributions.
Do you think he's fighting a lost cause?
Well, I'm thinking he's fighting a lost cause when it comes to getting any remuneration out of the force or any sympathy for that matter.
Were you aware in the force that there was no present policy to cover members under these circumstances other than the regular transfer policy?
Well, this is going back to the early 70s. In those days, you fellows used to get $1 a day extra on your pay, and that was it for sticking your neck out. And the history, going into the depth, this is the history of undercover men, is that, you know, their promotions were never accelerated. They were never given any recognition, and they didn't seem to get ahead any faster. In most cases, they didn't get ahead at all in the organization.
Okay, thanks for your call. Go ahead, please.
Yes, I would just like to say I think this gentleman's been very ill-treated, doing something in the line of duty for Canadians, and we're not doing anything for him in return when he was, actually his losses were incurred basically in the line of duty. I have a quick question, though. I'm wondering if he has any fear for this perpetrator who's in prison now, if he's afraid that he'll come out and after him again, and if he's taking any steps to protect himself.
That concern is always there and will remain there, I suspect, for quite a while. You know, I don't have any way of measuring that part of this case at all.
And another quick question. I was wondering, there was this talk of desertion in your job up in Kelowna. I was wondering if you could give us any details on that situation.
Well, what had happened was he was in Kelowna from March to November the following year, but he had picked up some leave time.
Oh, I see.
And he went down to
United States with my family.
Oh, I see. That was the period when you were in hiding with your family?
And when they ordered you directly to return, you didn't come back.
Oh, I see. Right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. It's complicated, but you can follow it if you listen closely. Go ahead, please.
Yes, first of all, as a private citizen, I would like to extend apologies to Mr. Westberg and his family. And I just wonder if at this point there's anything as private citizens that we can do to support you, since you have helped us with your life in the past.
I think the thing that I'd really like to accomplish for the other members and the Canadian public is that the public be assured that if policemen do this for the country and for the RCMP, that if they end up by their work becoming involved in a situation like this and their family becomes affected, that there be a policy implemented to cover the relocation of the home, and a special transfer policy look after a member in that situation. But I think the real reason that nothing has ever come of this is that Treasury Board in Ottawa does not want to start a precedence in regards to picking up the tab of the member's house in any circumstances, and I think Treasury Board feels that if they allow me to be compensated for the loss of my house on this kind of a transfer, that it may come to pass in perhaps years to come that they'll have to pick up the tab on members on any kind of a transfer. And I think that's the real reason why.
But it's an unreasonable fear, because the fact remains is that the force can judge itself quickly whether or not it's a reasonable fear. They wouldn't have put you under a no-team surveillance unit or hidden you in hotels unless they were fearful that you might be blown away.
In this instance, it was the RCMP that took the action. It wasn't me that implemented it, and the same thing would go if a policy was instituted that if the RCMP felt it necessary to relocate somebody, then this special provision to look after their home and relieving that responsibility from the member could be implemented.
Go ahead from Kelowna.
Yes, thank you, Jack. First of all, I want to establish I'm an ex-member. I've been out for several years now. And the whole story really reminds me a lot of what was going on about 1973 with the Maclean's magazine articles with Jack Ramsey and all that. And Jack was saying how crazy things were in the force at that time. I had the misfortune of seeing that firsthand, and consequently I got out. And I just want to say that I totally agree with your guest's position that the force should be made accountable for things when your leg gets messed up like that. I know even today I'm walking around and I'm still thinking like a cop a lot of times, and it does have a definite negative effect on one's social life, that's for sure.
Right. I don't have a problem at all with the members and the fellows that I worked with, even staffing branch and all the steps that the RCMP, as the members took. They used all the tools that they had available to them and the present policy available to them to try and help us out as a family in this situation. But where it began to fall apart was that nobody in the RCMP is willing to take and step out of any kind of policy and start any kind of a precedence because fear of promotion and fear of...
There's one other point I must raise, because you reminded me of the interview I did with Perrin Beatty. When you applied for the prospect of leave of absence, and the acting commissioner in Division E said, if he does, that you have to leave the service, the force, to stop the division created in his family, perhaps the commissioner would be prepared to waive the procedural preference rules. Now, you can explain them or I can explain them. To get into the force, you used to be able to take a leave of absence and come back a year or so later if you were still otherwise qualified. But since they tightened up the recruiting, if you're not, what is it?
If you're not bilingual, well, they give higher priority rate or points to a female applicant, a native Indian applicant, a bilingual person, and a university-trained person, as compared to an ex or a former member.
Yeah,
And
I've been through that battle before.
And
for British Columbia, which has more policemen than anyone else and probably gets fewer recruits than any other part of the country.
And that's why the issue of leave of absences for policemen has never really come to the point that it has right now today, because before, a former policeman could apply and quite likely, unless he'd been in some kind of trouble in his absence from the force, could be re-engaged. As it is now, though, former policemen are stacked up and compared against other applicants.
Well, I did a story last year when there was short of police officers coming through Regina, and there were a number of trained policemen prepared to come back to the force with good records, but the decision was made then that they would not waive the procedural preference rules, but you'd have to take recruits out of Regina. And I think, even although the acting commissioner recommended that, it's quite obvious that Perrin Beatty didn't consider that in the slightest.
And I can't understand that, and if the Canadian public would realize that it cost over $200,000 to train any kind of a recruit, and then to send them out in the field and out to British Columbia to take and be subjected to the roles of a police officer, and as compared to the economic good sense of hiring a member that has a proven track record, as myself, for 14 years, does not make sense. And I don't think any police officer, Canadian police officer, in the RCMP would object to the high quality of recruiting, but it seems that it only made good sense, as it would in any kind of industry like IBM. If you were a computer expert, had experience, they'd hire their experienced people first.
Mind you, I must put it quite clearly, you have put yourself out of that rehiring ballpark because your resignation has been accepted, correct? Not leave of absence. You didn't get your leave of absence.
That's right.
You didn't get your $26,000 loss, which you felt was forced upon you by the threat of terrorism on your family. You got some of your expenses recovered, but you wanted time off to re-establish your family and come back to the force as a thoroughly refreshed, confident policeman, and that has been denied to you.
That's right.
Even though your record is impeccable, I've seen your references in every way, shape, or form. House of Commons, lawsuit?
Well, I'd like, this lady asked what she could do for me. I think what Canadian people could do is to write, or the House of Commons, and write the members of Parliament and explain to them and just demand that the Solicitor General address this problem. There's no reason why I believe why a Canadian police officer in the RCMP should not be able to give a leave of absence, whether it's to go to school, to university, or to take and leave for whatever reason. And
come back if and when he's still suitably qualified.
Exactly.
Well, that did happen, but as you know, it was stopped under the new rules.
That's right. And now with the restraint on education in the RCMP, it's not easy for a member to go to university now. It's a tool that I think they're being remiss in not allowing RCMP members to use.
Well, I'll take it up with Perrin Beatty if I see him. I'll take it up with Turner or Kaplan when I see him, and you might be considering suing the force for wrongful dismissal. Although you failed to report for duty on 2 occasions on which they could probably hang you technically.
That's right, but I felt that previous to that, I had asked for direction in regards to...
For a year.
That's right,
And they
for 1 year.
waffled. At least they never gave you any answers until you got the final one.
And then Perrin Beatty, afterwards, after receiving all this information, his answer to it all on March 24th, was a year and a half later, was, because I've resigned from the RCMP, there was no need anymore to address this problem.
Kim Westberg, remember the face, remember the name. Best of luck.
Thank you very much.
After the break. Gayle Gavin. It's not Gavin Gayle.
No, Gayle Gavin.
Now we'll start again. Gayle Gavin is a lawyer for the woman plaintiff who nicked Jim Mercier for $3,600 for damages under the BC Council of Human Rights decision. And I must tell you, Gayle Gavin, that the viewer response last night was totally and 100% against your client. Everyone thought it was quite unreasonable that when a woman is offered a job, she's within a few weeks of pregnancy, poor employer. Why does he have to suffer not only that, but pay $3,600 damages? Now, perhaps you could give me the sequence of events which leads you to support your client's victory.
Well, the human rights member designate supported after he heard her position. Briefly, on October the 17th, she went for an interview. She was well qualified. She'd worked 10 years. She had good typing skills. She'd worked in similar businesses, and she was wanted for the job. They phoned her that afternoon. They offered her the job, and she accepted. She thanked them. She's a very gracious, pleasant, modest woman, make a good employee. And she said, now there's something that I should tell you. I'm expecting, and at that time her due date was 3 months away, January the 12th. And Mrs. McHughes, who was the office manager, said that just won't do. It would leave us hanging, and under those circumstances, we won't employ you.
Oh, that's good. 3 months away, your client said to the office manager. But I was told 6 weeks.
Well,
there may be some minor confusion there because...
she was 6 weeks early.
She delivered the baby 6 weeks early.
That's correct.
Well, now, if I'm going to hire a woman, or if I'm applying for a job and I'm within a short period of full term, is it not my responsibility to tell my employer that I have a bit of an impairment and I'm going to be off for 4 months in a very short period of time?
I think that that may be, and if the employer had been justified in this case in refusing, and there is a provision in the Act, and the member designate looked at that and decided he wasn't justified, there is what's called a bona fide occupational requirement to have a certain physical fitness. And certainly you can ask that question, and you can refuse employment on that basis if it's bona fides.
Can I ask a female employee, if I'm interviewing her for a job, if she is pregnant?
You can ask her. Now you may be putting yourself in some peril under some circumstances.
What do you mean putting myself in some peril? I want a permanent employee. I don't want somebody who's going to be off for 4 months for whom I've got to get a replacement employee just after I've hired her, do I?
Well, if you have a quite simple, straightforward job and the woman is far away from the date of confinement, then you may be found to be discriminating. Is what adjudicators have said about this issue, is that it's not necessary it's not necessary that there be no financial implications, but because it's a societal goal to make all of us equal as possible under the Act without going too far in balancing those rights against employers' rights, that some economic inconvenience is accepted because we live in a society in which there are limits on their individual freedoms.
So therefore you're going to put me down as the worst kind of chauvinist when I say that if I had a woman today, I phone her up to tell her she's got the job, and she then tells me that I'm going to lose her services for very shortly for 4 months. I can't say, no, I don't want you.
You can say it, and then she may bring a complaint, and somebody who is trained and has some overview and represents society values and is empowered and made to have that responsibility can look it over, and he may decide that you were right and he may not. In this case, for I think good reasons, he decided that there wasn't justification.
And gave $3,600 damages.
Yes, because it was a very simple, straightforward job, and she was very qualified for the job.
No, but therefore, if I'm going to hire anybody, which I'm not, I mustn't say to them, are you pregnant? Because if I don't pick them, she will run at once to the Council on Human Rights and say, he asked me if I was pregnant, I told him I was pregnant, he didn't hire me. Ipso facto discrimination.
Not ipso facto, perhaps. Depends on the circumstances.
But I've got to be very careful in asking a woman if she's going to be a permanent employee or if she's only going to be here for 6 weeks before she has her baby.
Jack, you've got to be very careful in weighing whether or not that is going to be a big problem in the job.
Questions to Gayle Gavin tonight. Now. Gayle Gavin is the lawyer for the woman who won the $3,600 judgment because she didn't get the job, even though she was within 6 weeks. 3 months her due date, but within 6 weeks of birth.
As it happened, but no one knew that when the job was refused.
Yeah, maybe they had second sight. Go ahead, please. Go ahead, please.
Hello, Jack.
Yes.
First of all, I'd like to say I think the decision is ridiculous. And Miss Gavin, I have a question for you. If a person wants to apply for a job and tell the employer that he has to take a vacation in 3 months for an approximate time of 4 months, would that be discrimination?
Jack, as we're all aware, society doesn't value people taking vacations 4 months or 2 weeks after they start a job as much as they value the right of people to have children and the need for society to have another generation.
It seems like it's the same difference to me on the employer's part.
Oh, having a baby is hardly having a holiday. But from the employer's point of view, I suppose it's the same. Go ahead, please.
I'd like to ask your guest what the owner's rights are in this case, and also what is her criteria for a wonderful, gracious person when someone would accept a position under false pretenses. All she had to say when she applied for the position is, I am pregnant, and it would have gone no further. And I think that Miss Gavin is a very poor representation for women's rights today.
Oh, Miss Gavin, Miss Gavin.
Case like this.
No. Please don't attack Miss Gavin. Miss Gavin used the law to her client's proper advantage. But she says that it's false pretenses to ask for a job when you're pregnant.
My client had an obligation to her family. She had an obligation as well. She had been unemployed for almost a year at this point, for 9 months at this point. She was sent to this job interview by Canada Manpower. Had she not gone to the job interview, which she wouldn't have done because she was in need of money and a job, she would have been cut off unemployment insurance, and had she not accepted the job, she would have been cut off unemployment insurance. The law of this country, Caller, recognizes that women can work while they're pregnant, indeed are expected to work while they're pregnant if they're to receive their benefits under the Unemployment Insurance Act to which they're entitled.
Good point. Didn't know that one. Mark one up for Gavin. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack.
Yep.
All right. A couple of things. First of all, while I can't help but empathize with the individual who is paid $3,600 to employ someone, and he's probably well rid of this individual. As a person who would take that type of attitude, it would cost him a lot more in the long run. And second of all, we have become over-encumbered with laws in this country when basic common law is superimposed with a tumult of other types of law, to the point where no one, including lawyers, know where they're going from day to day.
Yeah, Gayle?
Well, I think we know where we're going from day to day, Jack. This employer didn't want, or the office manager representing him didn't want this woman to work. It was a very simple, straightforward job that she was well qualified to do. There was a problem that one of the people for whom she would be doing the most typing didn't have legible handwriting because everything was presented in his first draft that he worked on over a period of time. There seemed to be no possibility he could do a second draft, or no possibility that he could use a dictaphone, and dictaphones are pretty common in
What's that got to do with it? I don't get the relevance of that eligibility.
Well, their defense was that it was going to take too long to train and retrain people. It was a simple job.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good evening. Ms. Gavin, I'd like to know if the judgment was rendered knowing whether or not your client continued to seek employment, and if yes, how many jobs did she solicit before her actual date of confinement? I'll hang up and listen to your answer.
The matter came before the tribunal almost a year after she'd been denied employment. She did have a job after her confinement, and she's still working now.
Go ahead from Prince George.
Hello, Jack. Miss Gavin.
Yep.
You are indeed a fine example of femininity that goes against everything called human, madam. Anyway, that is my opinion. 13 years ago, I went to Canada Manpower and was seeking training as a welder to supply my children and myself with a living. Mm-hmm. I had the misfortune to have a male counselor, and he informed me that welding was a male profession, that I should go home, stay home, and get pregnant. I told him to take his objections elsewhere.
What's to that effect? But what was the net upshot of this? You weren't protected by any human rights code at the time, were you?
Right. And I still have no profession, and I still am a single parent.
Well, that's regretful, caller. I know women who are welders and are supporting their families, and maybe that gives you some encouragement for women generally.
The times are changing, unfortunately. Perhaps say some old-fashioned people. Not me, of course, but old-fashioned people. Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack and Miss Gavin.
Yes.
I think that pretty soon you're going to see all kinds of pregnant women all over the place looking for jobs, disguising themselves as well as possible so that you can't tell they're pregnant, waiting to get the job, and then telling their employer that they need a leave of absence and collecting a few $1,000s.
Well, there is no money that she could collect at all in this case. She wasn't eligible for extended benefits under maternity benefits, and certainly the employer didn't have to pay her any money at all. He just had to give her job back when she came back, and very often employers find convenient reasons for not doing that. For example, if the job has been changed just a little bit and the new person is doing not quite all of the job description that the person left has done, they don't get their job back. That's happened many times in the province.
You have another gem of information there, though. Before I qualify for my 17-week UIC maternity benefit, what are the requirements?
You have to be what's called a major attachment claimant, and that means you have to work 20 weeks within the last year, and that was not the situation with my client.
20-week attachment.
She'd been unemployed for for about 10 months.
Go ahead from Penticton.
Yes, Jack. I had a couple of comments first. The training costs seem to be glossed over here. You know, it really costs a small company a lot of money to train these people. And, you know, it's very easy to say that, oh, this is an easy job for her to do and she's well qualified for it. But even familiarity with the accounts and so on is something that takes time and costs the company money. The second thing is the societal goal. I don't think that most people in society would agree with a decision like this, where a businessman has to take the responsibility for covering the absence of a woman who is, well, I don't know what the final decision was, 2 months or 6 weeks from her delivery date, but I don't think that that's reasonable for the
Yeah, no,
he has expected to do that.
Well, we're stuck with a societal goal because it's in the legislation, correct?
That's correct.
But as far as the time and money is concerned, he has a good point. That guy's cut his wages, cut his staff, you know, all kinds of things. And retraining someone after a 6 or 8 or even 12-week period is a pain in the butt. Leads to inefficiency and fewer profits.
The reason that was given by the employer was that retraining would take 2 months, she said, because it was difficult to read somebody's handwriting. Now, I think when you balance those two things, that it's not unreasonable for somebody to use a dictaphone or to do a second draft.
Okay, let me put it this way. As far as Webster viewers are concerned, you won the case but lost the war. Gayle Gavin might go to appeal, keep you busy for months. And
I think it will.
I'm not about to ask you any questions. And be careful what you say to applicants for jobs about pregnancy, so you'll get nailed. Not for the pregnancy, but for damages after the break.